Nick was always on the field. Well, excluding his few hundred-year-long break after the Dawson incident. When magic thinned, he found there was always some reckless teenager with a Ouija board or some self-sabotaging mortal in the middle of a midlife crisis willing to lend him their meat suit for a while in exchange that he do their homework or school an enemy or make their miserable life more bearable. He enjoyed milling around humans and using their inventions and discoveries. The invention of the GPS was his favorite. Made everything simpler when he found himself in a place that had changed so rapidly in 500 years, or 100, or 50, or 10, or 5. Humans got quicker and quicker, and so did he. He adapted their slang and their faces in exchange for a few souls, a few ideas, or a few blueprints to be smuggled back to Hell, and of course a way to enjoy any other earthly delights one simply could not source in Hell, like sushi or stargazing. Devils have always been fleshier than their demon neighbors, more access to the sensory and physical world than demons usually had. Whether they were actual demons or just dead people with a purpose still tethered to them, demons had no body, and instead had to infiltrate through the mind layer of reality, whereas devils worked on a similar ground as the Fae. Possession being possible, but being in your own skin always feels better. So when the world entered a state that allowed Nick to return in his physical form, he was delighted to be able to show off his devilish smile once more to a world he had grown so accustomed to and fond of over the millennia. That is, until the world fell apart, and then, to his dismay, Hell with it. Hell literally went to hell. The most anyone left with critical thinking skills could do was grimace at the pun. The problem with the power of magic being increased so much was that magic was energy, and energy was given off by everything. Every action, every reaction, every emotion, every punch, every kiss, every glance that had half a meaning, all of it had energy attached. The problem was that humans didn't live very long, so they didn't quite know how to deal with all of the energy they gave off. And sometimes they would try and get rid of the stuff they didn't want instead of keeping it to themselves. And sometimes they would give it to their kids, and sometimes those kids would give it to their kids. But that was not the poison that ruined Hell. No. Before the Fae had come out from their layer of reality into the physical one in mass groups and brought magic flooding in with them, enough to hold portals open through the layers of reality, before Nick could return in his own skin to the physical realm, before Hell was poisoned, before all of that, Hell was not a nightmare. It was pretty chill, actually, despite the hot temperatures. There were coffee shops with drinks that would please the dead but disgust the living. There was a lake, bulletin boards, a library, heck, there were even therapists. But now all those stories about Hell being a place to torture the dead started feeling more convincing, even to a person who literally lived there. Nick wasn't there when it started. Nick was playing a game of Uno under a bridge with a young lady at the time. Her name was Sandy. She was asking Nick about what the world was like before and giving her theories on what she thought it might be like after. I think one day someone will invent a curse that makes people's thoughts sentient, Nick recalled her saying as she placed down a yellow 3. I haven't seen it done yet, but with the punishments I've seen the loan sharks deal out, I think someone will figure it out one day. You know, he placed down a blue 3. There was a time before loan sharks all had sharp teeth. No way. That's why they're called loan sharks. It's the teeth. Nope, he said. Loan sharks all used to be human. When Fae started coming in more physically, they decided to take the name more literally. That's pretty funny. Sandy trailed off and looked back down at her cards, deciding her next move. I wonder how else the world will change. You know, I bet it's not just this realm that's changing. I bet more drastic changes will happen in other places, too. Maybe Hell will freeze over. She grinned. She had no idea how close she was. No, Hell didn't freeze over, at least not as a result of what ruined Nick's life. If someone turned down the thermostat from time to time, or froze the lake for a battle, for some non-seasonal ice skating, or for some non-seasonal ice skating, that had nothing to do with the sickness that was ravaging Hell. It dripped in through the thin veil like sludge through fabric. Slowly, yes, and it did filter some things out, but it sure did leave a stain. The thing about Hell is that it's where demons usually hang out, both the ones that always were and the temporary ones who are just the dead with a job to do. The thing about that, though, is that demons often do not know what their jobs are. They often come down crazed and confused, filled with too much power and too little sanity. See, this is why we employed the therapists. The ones that were born are old. Older than old. Because of that, things tend to blur together. They need a way to ground themselves, so they form very strong connections to things. Honor codes, lovers, jobs, deals, they stick to those things. The problem with this is that if they get corrupted and their minds just get slightly tilted askew, everything goes to hell. Literally. And that is what happened. Protectors became violent, devils trampled demons, deals were broken, lovers were killed, jobs were flipped on their heads, and Nick was the only one left sane. See, Nick mingled with humanity a lot, enough to know that this sludge was from that layer, enough that he gained a sort of immunity to it, which one would think would be fantastic. Being the sanest person in the room sounds like a good ticket to the top. Yeah, it sounds like that, until you remember that demons don't have bodies. They are built on energy. So with all of this sludge fueling them, Nick suddenly found himself to be very, very small. So as you can imagine, days when Nick was on the clock were not very good days. Today was one of them. Nick had just barely straightened out his scarf that he had neatly tucked into his vest when he was summoned before a grumpy and a little more than uneasy couple late one fall night. Leaves and pine needles crunched beneath the couple's worn boots and Nick's shiny, although a little burnt, dress shoes. Tall evergreens were black against the gray sky, which had begun to warn of rain, with light drops at the base of Nick's horns and the tip of his nose. "Good evening," Nick said, putting on a devilish yet professional grin. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" The man before him puffed out his chest before speaking in a way that could make a passerby wonder if he was trying to scare off a wild animal, as opposed to him conducting a business meeting in the woods. "We summon you here because we want to make a deal with you, devil, nothing else, so don't you go getting any ideas." "Wouldn't dream of it." The man looked back towards his wife and gestured for her to come forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward when she got within arm's reach. "We want money. Lots of it. And furs. The man agreed with his wife. "One's good enough to trade in places that won't take cash." "Of course, and would you like to shake on it or have a written contract?" "I, of course, will have a written contract either way, but for you to— Oh, we ain't selling our souls, devil." Oh, these fools. They were going to try and cheat him, weren't they? Challenge a game? Fight? Normally he would entertain such things, but today was already not a very good day, and the devil himself was just not feeling up to it. "We are going to sell you our firstborn child." Now that perked up Nick's ears. Been a while since someone tried to do that. The woman stepped forward with the tiny infant swaddled in her arms, its mess of wispy black hair waving just above her elbow. "They've been bathed, genuinely ours, fresh out of the oven, about 3.5 months old." She cautiously walked up to Nick and held out the baby. Just as some demons were known to snack and get drunk on the souls of humans and other mortals, some devils had grown fond of the fatty taste of infant humans. Nick was not often one to take such deals. It's not like he never went to dinner parties in hell. He has enjoyed the flavor of human before. It's just that Nick spent a lot of time around humans. Enough time to have befriended some and babysat for their offspring, free of charge, of course. If this were any other day, like a day before hell went to hell, he may have taken the deal. Infants can be useful once they are grown, not to mention Nick tended to have a knack for rehoming them to other conveniently childless couples that came to him for help. Nick didn't have to give them away to be eaten unless he had lost a bet. Not to mention, before hell got all corrupted, hell was a pretty safe place for infants generally. There were plenty of demons whose unfinished business was taking care of children, left over from things like dying to protect one while they were alive. But unfortunately, those jobs tended to be more one-word prompts than actual instructions, just remnant of what stuck with them from their time alive. So if what stuck with them was children, one could take that to mean to protect them. The therapist tended to help with figuring that out. But if, say, there was some kind of corruption leaking into hell, that may be taken another way, like attacking or eating. So as Nick looked down at this infant, thinking of what may happen to it if he took the deal, he decided to try and turn them away instead. "I'm afraid I'm only taking souls at the moment, but the baby has a soul." Of course, sir, but babies can neither sign papers nor consent to deals. They can shake hands." "Yes, but it's the consent part." "Well, at least have a look at the baby first before you turn us away." The woman shoved the tiny infant into his arms. "Can't you at least have a look at its soul or something, see if it's worth anything to you?" Nick decided to give in and have a look. Maybe while he did so, he'd be able to think of another place this couple could go that he could recommend. "I will warn you that this is an infant, we know." "Yes, but even though it may have a soul, its soul is only 3.5 months old, as you said. So unless it had one hell of a past life, it's probably not going to have much going on. Stop stalling and just look at it, you damn devil." Nick sighed and looked down at the infant's dark eyes as the couple stood impatiently with arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. Nick went to have a look. "Let me see here." He searched through the child's soul. It was as expected. Shallow, not much going on, no interesting wants, no guilts, no desires, no hopes, no drives. Loyal, determined, loving, creative. Nothing too out of the ordinary for an infant, especially not for a human one. Wait. He looked again, trying to keep his face steady so that the couple didn't think he was too interested. The gift of healing and prophecy? I didn't think anyone got that anymore. That spell would have worn off ages ago, along with that curse. Oh wait, not prophecy, just healing. He corrected himself. Seems like they probably won't have a hard time with any divination or observation skills, though. But healing? He thought to himself. He wondered what kind of healing it was. Physical, emotional, mental? He thought back to hell and the plague that was ravaging through there. The plague that had ruined his life. Having someone to heal sure would be useful. But there was no way that would work. He thought back on how his day was going, how his life was going. He was getting desperate. But this kid should have a normal life away from all that. He hated how that sounded. He hated that that was no longer a valid line of reasoning in his now corrupted line of work. He hated that he was the only person from hell who had had any thought similar to that since the corruption leaked in. The man spoke up, breaking the silence he was clearly uncomfortable in. If you want to know the gender, it's I know what it is, Nick said. The gender itself was not unusual, but the gift attached, although uncommon, is what gave it away. Nick blinked away from the child's soul. His eyes were focused back down on the child leaning against his blazer and vest. Nick had a decision to make. The rain started coming down a bit harder now, making itself more visible than the scarce thin drops it had been before. It would get cold soon. Well, colder than it already was. Nick decided to look into something. He knew their patience for this deal was running out, but he wanted to be sure there was another way that this could go. Nick looked back up at the couple in front of him and put back on his easy grin. If it's alright with you, I would just like to look into your souls real quick. No, don't worry, I won't go in too deep. I just want to have a quick look. The man stared back skeptically. We're not giving you our souls, we are selling you our child. Yes, of course. The words slid out of his mouth with easy confidence. I just want to make sure that this child is a good fit for hell as opposed to anywhere else. The woman seemed to stifle a smirk. Nick wasn't sure he wanted to know why. The man sighed, clearly annoyed and tired of this experience. Sure, go ahead, just don't steal anything. Wouldn't dream of it. He looked into their souls. This poor kid would have been bound for hell either way. Nick took the kid after writing up a contract and shaking hands and all that. But instead of disappearing back into hell and leaving nothing but some disturbed leaves behind, he walked off into the woods, and he kept walking. Even after he was sure that the damned couple could no longer see him, Nick needed to come up with some ideas, and fast. Nick had just made a deal for a child that he could not take back to hell. All he knew was that this poor kid had the gift of healing, had no parents to go back to, and might be able to save his life one day if it somehow managed to live that long. Nick began to panic, and it started to rain. Nick had walked far enough to have left the woods and ended up out on a dirt road. He carried the baby out past to the other side beneath a tree with leaves that spread wide enough to shelter it from the rain a bit. He went to lay the baby down for a moment so that he could have a chance to try and properly think about what to do. The baby was swaddled in thin cloth, something that would have probably been better suited for the summer than a night out in the cold fall rain. So far, the babe had been content with their current situation, what with the heat that radiated off of the devil himself, but he was going to put them down somewhere But if he was going to put them down somewhere, he knew that with the temperature change, they would not stay content for long. So he took off his warm plaid scarf and wrapped them in it before setting them down beneath the tree. The devil raised his arms and tugged at his horns. Oh, God, what do I do? He mumbled to himself. He looked out across the field of blackberry bushes through the now pouring rain and saw a brightly lit town. The lights seemed to be moving. He looked back down at the child swaddled in the red knitted threads of hell. Their long eyelashes brushing their cheeks as they fell asleep, warmed by the heat that radiated off of the scarf. At least they'll have a baby blanket that will never wear out, Nick thought to himself, thinking of all the times he had met mortals whose baby blankets had been reduced to nothing but fragile string over the years. He tugged at his horns again. He couldn't go back. He knew that he couldn't take care of the baby himself, and if he wanted to keep them safe, he definitely couldn't let anyone from hell know that this child now belonged to him. The power of healing, whatever that entails, could very well be the thing to save him from his current predicament. He reminded himself. They could save all of hell, even. Nick didn't want to get his hopes up. This was an infant that may not even survive the week the way things were looking. Nick heard shouting in the distance. The lights were becoming brighter. He looked out. The townsfolk seemed to be gathered in a mob, torches blazing with angry plumes of smoke that floated up through the rain as they ran towards something. Some kind of a dog, or was it a pony? Nick couldn't tell. The shouting in the distance got louder as they backed the creature into a circle of bushes and set them ablaze with their torches. Loud cheering could be heard from across the field. With all that rain, that must have been a purposefully set trap for that to work. The townsfolk started setting things on fire and throwing them at the panicked creature, its silhouette dodging about and getting more and more frantic to find a way out. Nick's eyes widened with understanding as he realized what was going on. The fire set scraggly shadows from the bushes in every direction. A plan was forming in his mind. Nick could not protect this child himself, but he could do what he did best. He was the devil, after all, and now he had a plan. He was going to make a deal with someone who he knew could not break it even if they wanted to.